So one of the aspects that I also love that you explored towards the end of your book was answering the question of why Satan was being released in Revelation chapter 20. So I think this is important, and I just really love the way that you talked about this. So I want to go there with you. You say, why must Satan be released? This is not a fleeting detail or a slip of the quill, for the word must is a verb that connotates divine necessity by a divine mandate. Oddly, then, Satan's release isn't a jailbreak or an accidental escape. No, his release is as divine willed as his capture. But why? So, Shane, as we close, help us answer this question of why. Through the lens of the differences between the Roman triumphal procession and God's triumphal procession. How did the difference between those two tell us the answer to the question of why God releases Satan?
Yeah, this is the answer to this is only possible if you agree with the methodology that this was written to real people at a real time going through real issues.
Yeah.
And that to me is where biblical study begins. Like we are overhearing by God's grace letters between pastors and their people. And they can apply to us, but they weren't written to us. We get to overhear what was written to them and then benefit from it.
Yeah.
So with that in place, and this release of Satan was a key feature of my dissertation at Edinburgh. It's this. I wanted to see the world from the eyes of the subjects of the empire that were Christians.
Mm.
So when you're a subject of an empire, you don't get to decorate the empire. You're just saturated with the imagery and the messages that are trying to lure you into an identity that matches the empire's goals. And these messages come on architecture, they come on coins, they come in plays, they come in parades. Like there is, and I delineated it between you have enacted propaganda and you have static. Static is like it's in marble, so it's not going to go anywhere. Enacted though is it's these parades down the street. And one of the best examples of this in the Roman world is what was called a Roman triumphal procession. So a Roman triumphal procession it's actually where our Fourth of July parades actually came from. Like it's this idea. I did this in high school. You know, you make these floats. You know, you're all over there working and making these big elaborate floats, and the bigger, the more elaborate, and the more lifelike. That's the goal. Well, that's what a Roman triumphal procession did.
Mm.
Roman triumphs were awarded whenever a significant military victory expanded the limits of the empire. When it expanded the limits, what they wanted to do is to not just celebrate it. They wanted to actually bring the battle that the people of Rome didn't get to experience. They want to bring it to them so that they could actually experience it as if they were a part of it.
Mm.
And they would do it by parading the spoils of war. So the more exotic animals and the exotic plants and the weaponry would literally be paraded down the streets of Rome, while all of the citizens of Rome came wearing white robes, because in the Roman world, white robes was a symbol of victory, of that we have won the battle. So everybody's there, they're watching it all, the sights and the smells, and at the time they would have big floats. These floats that would depict moments of the war. As a matter of fact, Josephus even describing the Roman triumphal procession in 71 after the destruction of the Jews and the Jerusalem temple. He describes it. He says they were so lifelike, where he talks about fire coming down on the walls and the armies pouring over. He said it was so lifelike, it was as if the onlooker was actually present.
Wow.
And they would even use those moments at times in different triumphs to execute enemy soldiers. They would force the enemy soldiers to reenact the moment of their defeat as a way of killing them.
Wow.
So Josephus even says they kept some of the prisoners after the destruction of the Jerusalem temple, because they went, and he said the tallest and the most beautiful, because they wanted to keep them for the triumph. Because it was not just a celebration of a victory, it was the consummation of the victory. It was the moment whenever the victory was fully complete, fully present. So with all of this in place, you have all these spoils, but there are two key features of every triumph that everybody was looking forward to. You would always look for what was called the quadriga, which was the emperor or the general riding on this chariot pulled by four white horses. That was a huge feature, and it was always at the end of the triumph. You also were looking, though, what was in the position, it was called the anticurum position. You were looking for the chief enemy leader bound in chains, marching right before anticurum, right before the quadriga. And the chief enemy leader would literally be not killed in the battle, they would be saved for the triumph. They would even at times be imprisoned for over a decade so that they could get everything together to celebrate this triumph.
Wow.
And the chief enemy leader would be marched all the way across the city of Rome, usually from a municipal building to a religious one, indicating the connection between the civic advancement of Rome by the will of the gods. They would be marched all the way there. And then once they got to the steps of the Temple of Jupiter, the chief enemy leader would be let off and everything would go silent until the signal was given that that enemy leader had been sacrificed, executed, as a kind of like an offering to the gods. And then they would actually move into this big celebration. So many, this wasn't like an isolated event. There were literally in the, it's called the Fasti Triumphalis, in the middle of the Roman Forum. There was over 300 triumphs, beginning with 753 BCE, which would have been Romulus, all the way to 19 BCE with Balbus, whenever Augustus decided we're no longer going to let generals do this, only emperors are going to do this. Like, this was a big deal.
Yeah.
It decorated triumphal arches. So if you go to Washington Square Park in New York today, that big arch, that's a triumphal procession arch. And if you look at the imagery, it's Roman triumphal processions that mirror the Arch of Titus. If you went to Rome today, shortly or a little ways away from the Colosseum, so it decorated empire because it was a key symbol of the Roman dominance over the world and the will of the gods for Rome to be ruling.
Yeah.
So all of that now in place.
Yes.
In Revelation chapter 20, verses 1 through 10. Verses 1 through 3, two things happen. We see Satan is bound with a chain and he is imprisoned. And then in verse 3, that's where you get that the divine necessity. It says, where he will be kept until after the 1,000 years is over, when he must be released. And then in chapter 20, verse 7, he's released. And you're thinking, now this is weird. Why would you bind and imprison this dude we've been hoping for the last 8, 9, 10 chapters? Why would you release him? But then what's fascinating is when he is released, he's released and he starts marching with all of his soldiers. He's marching. But it actually never says it says he's released from his prison, but it never says he's released from his manacles, his chains. So the image is he's released from his prisons, he's marching in chains, and he has all of his armies with him, and then he surrounds the city God's love, and there's no battle. Literally, fire comes down from heaven, like Elijah on Mount Carmel, wipes them out,
Yeah.
and the enemy is like sacrificed.
Yeah.
So what is happening? Why must Satan be released? Because Revelation 20 ends by releasing Satan to march in God's triumphal procession, which tells me a couple of things. Number one, the battle's already been won. Jesus won the battle on the cross of Calvary, which is why in Revelation 19:13 he comes to this victory parade with his armies all dressed in white robes, by the way. He comes, though, with his white robe already dipped in blood. Whose blood? The battle hasn't been fought yet. Well, yeah, it has. If you're marching in a triumphal procession, the battle's already been won. We're now just consummating the battle with the celebration victory.
Yeah.
So why must Satan be released? To march in God's triumphal procession, which tells us Jesus has already won. And number two, that we are living in victory today over Satan, regardless of what his deceptions have convinced us of.
Man, that is so beautiful. It's like to understand that the Bible is constantly speaking into the culture and context of its day is so important to get the truth of it. And that's when I read that, I was like, man, I can't wait to ask this, because that's when you have that rich of knowledge of the history of Rome, that can help you understand what this lonely, exiled author was writing about when he put this into the narrative of his apocalypse. And I just think that, like, the Bible is constantly doing that, even in the Old Testament when it speaks out in Genesis 6 against the daughters of men and the sons of men coming down to lay with them, and then all the whole story there with the Nephilim, like it's speaking a polemic and political witness into this day. And if you understand the tales of Babylon and everything that's going on, you're like, oh wow, this makes sense what they're saying here. And in the same way, like when we read this, the shocking kind of triumphal possession or release of Satan in the cultural context of its day, it makes sense and brings us closer to the hope and revelation of Jesus. So that's so awesome, man.